The Entrepreneur's Library, Episode 83.
Welcome to the Entrepreneur's Library, the only book-centric podcast that reviews all the top-selling business books and shares authors' perspective firsthand. This is your resource to finding the next great book that will enable you to grow personally and professionally. Welcome your host, Wade Danielson.
Welcome back to the Entrepreneur's Library. Today we have Jeff Sutherland, author of Scrum, The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time. Welcome, Jeff, and thank you for joining us on the Entrepreneur's Library.
Glad to be here.
Will you take just a moment to introduce yourself and tell us just a little bit about you personally?
Yeah, my name is Jeff Sutherland. I'm CEO of a company called Scrum, Inc. I had a career as a fighter pilot, which is part of what led to the book I'm going to talk about. I spent 11 years in the Air Force. I was a West Point graduate. What I learned flying over North Vietnam, flying 100 missions over North Vietnam, is embedded in my book. When I get back, I went to complete an advanced degree in a medical school, and I was a professor of radiology, biometrics, and preventive medicine. I was on the faculty of the medical school for 11 years, and there I studied and actually did mathematical modeling of the human cell and how it becomes cancerous. And this work in complex adaptive systems is embedded in Scrum and in the book. I was hired away from the medical school into a large banking company. And when I looked at what they were doing in software, I realized that their projects were almost always late, over budget. The customers were upset. And management responded by having more reporting, more meetings, more micromanagement, and it just made things worse. So coming from a completely different perspective, the military and the medical school, I implemented what I learned in those domains into IT, and that resulted in the creation of Scrum, which has now become the dominant agile process worldwide.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. Now let's jump right into your book that you just discussed, Scrum, which was made available for purchase on September 30th, 2014. And Jeff, we're going to move quickly, but we're going to cover the top questions that our reader/listener would love to get answered. And the first one is, what was the inspiration behind writing Scrum?
Well, several years ago, I wrote a book called Software in 30 Days with Ken Schwaber, who was my colleague and helped to move Scrum out into the world. And in there, we focused mainly on IT and software development. There's still a raging debate going on between the old way of doing things and the new way of doing things. For example, there's a recent blog at the ACM Communications site by Bertram Mayer, a famous computer scientist who was one of my certified Scrum Masters, went to my training. And he's claiming that the book is, complaining about a software crisis, but everything is really okay. And the data from the Standish group that we use, which shows that 86% of traditional projects fail, is suspect. So there's still this raging debate about what works and doesn't work. And I also wanted to amplify on that. And also, I wanted to talk about how Scrum is moving outside of software development. It actually originates in hardware development. Was moved into software development, and now is expanding into education, agriculture, healthcare, schools and education, and so forth. I wanted to tell all the great stories about Scrum that I couldn't get into my software book.
Excellent. So you and I were discussing beforehand how many different books come out and how entrepreneurs are inundated with, with books and content in general. And so this next question is really to help them wade through some of the mess, and that's what makes your book different from others regarding the same or a similar topic?
Okay, if you go to Amazon right now, this book has moved up to the top of the list on time management. And I think it's still behind Getting Things Done, which is number one. But I expect it will move ahead of that because Scrum is about getting things done with teams, and teams are much more powerful than the individual. So the title of the book is Scrum, The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time. So if there's anyone out there that wants to do that, this book is probably the best book for you to read first.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that as well. So How do you suggest the reader engage with your book? Is this a book that they should read from front to back, or one that they can go in and kind of cherry pick information as needed?
Well, it's specifically not designed as a reference book. There's probably 100 books on Scrum out there that are focused on IT and have detailed references to all the pieces. This book is designed to tell the stories about why Scrum works, the fundamental reasons why it works, and the way it's been used in many different domains. So you can read it from beginning to end. You could just pick up a chapter and read it. Any way you read, you're going to find a very interesting story focused on a critical issue for teams getting work done.
So, Jeff, thank you for sharing the inspiration and some of the differentiators from your book. And now this is my favorite part of the interview, where I want to hand over the mic and allow you to really give us a deep dive into your book. So will you give myself and our reader/listener a great idea of what your book is all about?
Sure will. The book starts off with the first chapter. It's entitled "The Way the World Works is Broken." Research shows, and global surveys show, that most people hate work. The only thing they think is worse than going to work is being sick in bed. And the New York Times has even done articles on all the reasons why people hate work. The reason, I believe, that is the fundamental driver of this problem is that people can't get stuff done. There's a famous poem by Robert Burns that, the best laid plans of mice and men often go wrong, and instead of the promised joy, you wind up with a lot of grief and pain. And so projects can't get done. Now, I first learned about that as a cadet at West Point, and I had a project as training officer when I was there as a first classman. And my job was to get my company to march well on the parade field. And the company was Company L2, known as the Loose Deuce, because for the last 100 years, they'd been the worst company on the parade field. And the culture of mediocrity was embedded. So no matter how much extra training we did, it didn't work. So what I started to do was make work visible by posting in color-coded notes on the company bulletin board after every parade our grades. The grades were done by all the training officers for all the companies. And to everyone's surprise, within 3 months, the company became the #1 marching company on the parade field at West Point for the first time in over 200 years. And that really indelibly imprinted on my mind that making the work visible so everybody can see everything that's going on will cause teams to self-organize to achieve great results. And I also learned at West Point a lot about planning. And I'll talk about that a little later in the book. But this whole idea about teams self-organizing to get great results is key to Scrum. If you look at the way people are implementing, in the first chapter we talk about the FBI Sentinel project, which is designed to bring all the data together in order to detect things like 9/11 before it happens. After spending $400 million, hundreds of people, for many, many years, the system didn't work, and the government accounting office shut it down. They had $50 million left in the budget. The FBI took 15 developers, put them in the basement of the FBI building, ran it as a Scrum, and in a little over a year, they brought the entire project in under budget. So, for about 10% of the project cost, they delivered 80% of the work. And that's what Scrum's designed to do. The book is Scrum, the art of doing twice the work in half the time. Well, we have many other examples in that chapter on where things don't work. Obamacare, it turned out not a single person could sign up. That system was rescued in 6 weeks by an agile team out of Google and Twitter. In 6 weeks, they were able to sign up 7 million people by implementing Scrum. Okay, so the first chapter is on why things are broken and how Scrum fixes them. That leads us into the origins of Scrum, the background, which is fascinating. I mentioned my experience at West Point. graduating from there and going into the Air Force, flying F-4C Phantoms in reconnaissance over North Vietnam, I learned about the importance of when you go into a conflict like that, which is very heavily defended, you cannot execute your plan. One of our favorite graduates, Dwight D. Eisenhower, had a quote that said, planning is really important, but plans are useless. As soon as you start executing, the first shot that is fired will blow up your plan. So I had to learn to understand what the goal was, and then very creatively and deceptively, from the point of view of the people shooting at me, get to the target and get back alive. So that was one of the keys to the origins of Scrum. The second key is when I came back, I decided to go to the Air Force Academy and become a professor there and teach mathematics and statistics. The Air Force sent me to Stanford to get a degree. The work I liked the best was actually in the medical school at Stanford, so I continued. When I got to the Air Force Academy, I continued my PhD work at the University College Medical School, and there I had to learn a deep understanding of complex adaptive systems in order to understand how a cell mutates and evolves into a cancer cell, and to figure out how to prevent that or how to turn it back. Because of the computing work I was doing on modeling, I became one of the experts in the systems that banks were using to roll out automated telenetworks. So a large banking company hired me to help roll out telenetworks for 150 banks all over North America. And when I went into the bank and watched what they were doing, their projects were always late. The management was always upset. They were working people nights and weekends and sending them on death marches. And I went to the CEO and I said, I'm just a medical school professor, but what you're doing makes no sense to me. It doesn't work at all. So I said, why don't you give me everyone involved in the telenetworks? I'll run them as one team and like a little company within the big bank. And once a month, I'll present you my results, and you can be my board of directors, you and the senior management. But the rest of the time, you stay out of my company, and I'll show you how to fix this. Well, in less than 6 months, this company went from 30% more cost than revenue to 30% more revenue than cost, a 60% swing in margins, and became the most profitable company in the bank. And the way I did it is I used the techniques at West Point, and I implemented what I learned in the Air Force, and that was, how do you land a high-performance fighter on the end of the runway? How does a team land a software project on the end of the runway? You do it in short cycles. So I said, okay, at the beginning of the week, we're going to prioritize everything by business value, and at the end of the week, we're going to deploy everything we do live, and during the week, we're going to work as one cross-functional team, getting stuff all done together. And that is what drives companies then, and that's what's driving most of the software industry today. So these origins of where Scrum started, there's many more interesting stories around that in the second chapter. In the third chapter, we get more focus on the teams. A lot of managers don't understand that, the difference in the best performers and the worst performers as individuals is 1 to 10. But if you look at the difference between the best teams and the worst of teams, it's 1 to 2,000. So the team effect is 2 orders of magnitude bigger than the individual effect. So as a manager, if you take a team and you try to increase productivity person by person, it's going to take you a long time, maybe forever. But if you implement Scrum with a cross-functional team and you focus the team on the goal, they can double their production in a few weeks. The difference is amazing. So the whole thing about Scrum is to focus on the team and understand how teams work. There's some other important factors in team performance. One of them is known as Conway's Law. The structure of your organization will reflect in the implementation of your work. So if you have a command and control hierarchical organization, you will wind up with command and control hierarchical product. And when you do that, your product becomes brittle, it becomes hard to maintain, it becomes hard to change, it has performance problems because there are bottlenecks. It's a mess. So we have to think about how we change the organizational structure to deal with that problem. Second, because of another law called Brooks Law, we know that the larger the team is, the slower it goes. There's a lot of reasons for that I don't have time to go in now, but it's all in the book. But the bottom line is, if a 6-person team can finish a project in a year, if you add 4 people to that team, it will delay the project by 6 months, and it will take 18 months for a 10-person team to get a year's work done with 6 people. For some strange reason, most managers don't understand that dynamic. All teams need to be small. Harvard research has shown the number is around 5 people. So we show examples of great teams. The first Scrum team was motivated by the Boston Celtics basketball team in the 1980s, by the All Blacks rugby team. We watched how do those teams get into the zone where their performance just becomes astonishing. And our team worked how to get there. And by the time we were done, we had increased our performance by a factor of 10. So you can get tremendous performance out of teams, and it's not just in software. There are examples in special forces. One of the most interesting teams is the National Public Radio team that covered the Arab Spring. Using Scrum, they won almost every major journalism award for the entire year during the time the Egyptian Revolution was going on. So there's a lot of focus on how people can get teams to do twice as much work in half the time. So that brings us to the 4th chapter. That's all about time. One of the fascinating things is that people want to measure the hours people work. Well, the fascinating thing is that if you measure hours that people work, you're measuring cost. And the more you measure the hours, the more cost you get. And the hours have nothing to do with production. In fact, particularly in software, the people that do the most production often do it in the fewest hours. So you need to measure production. And we talk a lot about how to get into planning. There's many different case studies in there. One of the most interesting ones is, how do you take a $55 billion company and run their stock price from 25 to 50 in less than a year? You do it using Scrum in their most critical project. They brought us in because they had a traditional project that was going to be at least a year late, and the last time they did a project like this was 3 years late. We brought in Scrum training, and with their people, we did the project in 6 months. So we did twice the work in half the time and doubled their stock price. I've worked in some companies where we quadrupled the stock price in less than a year by implementing Scrum within the company. So any entrepreneurs that read this book, they've got to think about doing Scrum. Chapter 5 focuses on, what happens when you focused on measuring hours. If you measure hours, you get a lot of waste. People think they have to hang around at their desk and punch their clock by doing nothing. And so they waste a huge amount of time. Now, Scrum is based on the work of 2 professors, Takeuchi Nanaka, who was studying lean companies like Toyota, Honda, 3M in the United States. And what they noticed was the best teams, was all based on cross-functional teams, focused on eliminating waste from their system, and every weekly cycle they'd be figuring out how to pull out more waste from the system. And I work with a venture capital group. We have almost $1 billion invested in 30 to 40 companies. And we give the management a book on the Toyota production system, the book written by the founder, Taiichi Ono. And in there, he says it's all about removing waste. And we train the managers on how to remove waste from the system. 85% of what companies are doing out there is waste. And for an entrepreneur to try to start up a company with that 85% waste, it's like trying to get your startup to run with a chain around your neck. You've got to eliminate waste. So we show systematically in that chapter how to build a cross-functional team that gets on a self-improvement cycle that is continually removing waste from the system and accelerating faster and faster. We move into planning, which really comes off of this idea of time. People think, okay, we'll plan our project and it's going to take 2,000 hours and 1 year, and we'll make a big chart and try to track it. And usually then the project is a year late and takes 4,000 hours. That's very typical in the industry because of the way they're planning. Scrum uses reality-based planning. We say, okay, let's take a big project. Let's take a little piece. Let's do it in a small chunk with a small team or a set of teams. And at the end of 2 weeks, let's show something working that an end user can try out and give feedback. So every 2 weeks, we're checking, are things working? Is the product on track? What is the speed at which production is going? Is the speed of production going to hit the target? And so this whole issue around reality-based planning by looking at the real product working every week or two and looking at the real numbers on velocity of production is key. And so this chapter actually gives the entrepreneur the nuts and bolts on how to get this implemented in the company with a lot of stories and examples around the planning and implementation. Now, when you focus on trying to get really high-performance teams and getting to go faster, one of the things you have to know is that the motivation of the team is a multiplier of velocity. And the motivation of the team is based on the happiness of the team. And so we describe in the 7th chapter, how do you get employees so motivated and so happy that, number one, they never leave your company. You don't have any turnover anymore, which causes a lot of waste. Number two, they get twice the work done in half the time. Number three, they're having fun. And number four, they're figuring out their work. They're planning their work. They're making sure the company objectives are being met instead of the management running around trying to put Band-Aids on everything, okay? So you got to get your people happy, okay? So in my company, we use, at the end of every week, we do a retrospective, a debrief on what's happening. Every team does this. And what our teams like is the happiness metric. And so everybody talks about, okay, in the last week, how did I feel about my job? On a scale of 1 to 5. 5 is fantastic, 1 is terrible. And then we talk about what will make me happier next week. And as soon as we get the happy issues on the table for every member of the team discusses what will make the whole team happier next week. And surprisingly, the happiness level is a better forward predictor of revenue than any of our current financial metrics. Again, this is one of these counterintuitive things that most entrepreneurs don't really understand. You know, they don't have much money. They're behind in their deadlines. They think by putting more pressure on people and demotivating them that they'll get things done faster. But actually, the reverse is the case. If you get the people to figure out what's going to work better for them, they'll be happier and they'll get more results and more revenue. So happiness drives revenue. That's the bottom line. So how do you get your employees happy is the issue in Chapter 7, and we got lots of stories around that, how that works. Now, in order to drive performance, you not only need to go fast and you need to have happy employees, you need to have your priorities straight. Okay, so in agile practice, we know, for example, that 20% of the features in a product deliver 80% of the value. And particularly in software, 65% of the features are never used by the customer, or used so rarely they should never have been built. There have been companies that have done studies of that. Big companies like Adobe, for example, that have determined that 95% of the features that they used to build were waste, never used. And so entrepreneurs need to really get their priorities straight, and they need to deliver a minimal viable product to the market rapidly with a limited number of features to get feedback. And if they deliver the right features, they can create a huge amount of value for the product. The Apple iPad is a great example of that. Steve Jobs was a brilliant product owner that we have in Scrum. And, when he looked at the prototypes of the iPod, he said, we don't need all those features. Throw away that on-off switch. Get it down to the bare simplicity. And if you do that right, then you can become a really profitable company. Apple is the most agile company in Silicon Valley, and depending on which day you look at their numbers, they are either the most valuable company in the world, or on alternate days, Exxon is. So priorities drive performance. It drives market share, it drives stock price, it drives the valuation of the company. So Scrum is a perfect tool to make that happen. And finally, if you can do this in software, or you can do this in hardware where Scrum started, we're seeing Scrum moving out across the world. We're seeing that, companies building rockets are using agile practices. Companies building cars, we have one of our employees builds cars in 1 week sprints. Every week, the whole car is upgraded, and it actually runs on the road. We're consultants to John Deere. John Deere is getting 700 or 800% more production using Scrum to build their big agricultural equipment. But it's moving beyond that. We're finding that it works even in families. There's a book on agile families showing how you can use Scrum to make your family happier. The last couple of weeks I've been in conferences. I've said, okay, how many people in here have done their wedding using Scrum? 6 people in the room in one group had used Scrum to produce the wedding, because you get twice as much work done in half the time, particularly in an environment where there's a lot of pressure, like getting ready for a wedding. But the most interesting implementation of Scrum today that we see is actually in education, both in the US and Europe. The best implementation of educational Scrum I've seen in the Netherlands. It's called EduScrum. If you go to eduscrum.com. I visited them earlier this year. The bell rings, the kids come running into the room in teams of 4, and they have what we call Scrum boards with sticky notes they post on the wall. They have a daily meeting. They figure out what they're going to do next. They run to the desk and start working. The teacher just stands there. He says, I'm the product owner that tells them what the order of what they need to do, but I don't get to talk unless they ask me for help. And he says, even when they ask me, they never let me talk more than 10 minutes. And the teacher said, it eliminates virtually almost all of the motivational and performance issues with the kids. I have no more disciplinary problems anymore. That the teams are self-managing. It also involved the handicapped kids directly, because they just participate seamlessly in the daily meeting and the work. They become first-class citizens in the class. One of them had been an autistic kid. I suppose he still is autistic. 2 years ago, he couldn't hardly talk to anyone. He's become a Scrum Master, which is the team leader in Scrum. And he described what happened and how he's working his team. And the kid has become a great leader and a great communicator. It actually is transforming to the individuals. And one of the girls in the class had told us she had gone to dinner at home a couple of weeks ago, and her father came home really depressed. And the family asked why. And he said, they implemented Scrum in my IT group today. And the girl asked, well, what are you doing? And when he explained, she said, you're doing it all wrong. You're doing it in a way that's going to make it slow, hard, and painful. Scrum is fast, easy, and fun. And here's what you need to go back and do. So my view of the future of the world is to get these kids who naturally take to Scrum. They say, we can't believe you designed this for adults. It's perfect for teenagers. Is to get these kids to train their adults on how to completely revolutionize the whole way of working in the world, no matter where they're working. So, as the title of my book says, Scrum, the art of getting twice the work done in half the time. So that's the book from beginning to end. I think the most interesting example of a Scrum team in the book was actually covering the Egyptian Revolution in Tahrir Square. My son, who helped write a lot of the book, was leading production of reporting in Tahrir Square. He was a war correspondent at National Public Radio for over 10 years. And he had to smuggle his correspondents into the square. Occasionally they would get locked up by the secret police. He'd have to get them out of jail. And every day he ran a scrum with 2 daily meetings because there were 2 cycles of news every day. And every hour things would change. And because getting the teams to use Scrum to do the work so that everybody understood what was going on, they could actually help one another produce programming that won virtually every major journalism award for that year. So this is just an example of the many great stories in the book that the general business reader can read, have fun and enjoy the reading, but also get really good ideas on how to boot up their company into a much higher level of performance.
Jeff,
so, yeah, go ahead.
You did a great job of giving us a bird's eye view of what your book's all about. And just like what you said there at the end, the stories, I think I could listen to you for another 20, 30 minutes just talk about the different stories and how they're used and the wide spectrum of kid to adult to, correspondence, military, journalism to, all this kind of stuff. And then to originate with, hardware and software. So, amazing, and really one of the first times that I've heard, this again when we go back to what differentiates it, come from this angle. So I think your book sounds amazing, and this next question is a little bit more difficult in that really we're asking, for everything that you just talked about, everything that you just relayed to us, can you break that down into what's your top golden nugget, or basically, the normal way I ask is if the reader can only take away, one concept, principle, or action item out of your entire book, what would you want that to be?
Yeah, for the typical reader business person would read this book, the key issue is that within every person and within every team is a spirit of greatness that lays untapped. And to tap that, trying to use a traditional management style will not work. You're going to have to become a different type of leader. And Scrum gives you an organizational structure to bring out from the team that greatness that is within.
Perfect. Jeff, do you have a favorite quote from your book?
Yeah, the favorite quote is on the cover. I can't remember it verbatim, but one of my classmates at West Point was a 4-star general, General Barry McCaffrey. And I hadn't talked to him for years, but I asked him if he'd write a little blurb for my book. And with less than 5 minutes, he sent me a note as Einfeld. He said, yes. And his blurb was basically, the entire armed forces need to get agile. There's a lot of examples in this book. Anyone who's a leader needs to read this book. They need to implement Scrum. It's not optional. It needs to be done now. So if a 4-star general is telling the entire military, do it now, that's what I would say to all your readers.
Yeah.
Read this book and do it now.
That's definitely some credibility. And Jeff, I don't say this lightly, but I think that your book will create a paradigm shift and really impact a ton of people that read it, and not only read it, but implement the different ideas that you've talked about here today. And so my last question for you is, what's a book that you've personally read that has had a huge impact, created some paradigm shifts in your life that you could recommend to our reader/listener?
Well, in thinking about that, I think one of the books that's had the most, coming from a military background, one of the books that's had the most impact on me is called The Book of 5 Rings. It's about the greatest swordsman that ever lived, a guy named Musashi. And the way he thinks about entering into conflict and how to dealing with battle and how to deal with the short-term pressures while simultaneously dealing with the long-term issues. And he fought with both a short sword for close in and a long sword simultaneously for strategic issues. And he never lost a single battle. And when he got older, he started to write because he said the pen is mightier than the sword. And so that's why I'm writing this book, to give the average entrepreneur the capability of fighting with that short sword and long sword, just like Musashi, so that winning is certain, so that you can succeed with your company, whatever your goals may be. You can take it public, sell it, expand it, make it a Google. Scrum is behind every great software company today and every really great hardware company like Toyota. So Random House said, this is the secret sauce that's driving production in all the best companies of the world, but most people don't know about it. The average person doesn't know that in their law firm, they could do twice as much in half the time. Or in their bakery. A chiropractor sent me a note this week. He said, can I implement that in my practice? Maybe I could get, twice as much, particularly on the administrative side, twice as much done in half the time. Absolutely. It will work for everyone.
Yeah, it's huge. So, Jeff, before we depart, can you recommend the best way for our listeners to get more information on you and your book, Scrum?
Yes. My company's website is scruminc.com. So we have information on what we do, the book, everything about the book, where you can order it. We also have the largest repository of information on how to do Scrum on the web today. It's growing every day. It's called Scrum Lab. And so if you want to know anything about Scrum, scruminc.com, scruminck.com.
So, Jeff, we're going to put all this. We just revamped our show notes page so people can go to the actual website, the elpodcast.com, and get all these different resources. So the book that you mentioned, some of the different links that you just mentioned there at the end, how to best get in touch with you. All of that's going to be on our revamped show notes page so that they don't. We've learned that so many people are listening via mobile and not around to actually act right now. So we put that on our website so that they can jump back on and check it out. So. But, Jeff, more than anything, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your book with us.
Thanks for inviting me. It's been great talking to you.
Thanks again for listening in today. If you would like to get more information on Scrum or more resources mentioned by Jeff in the actual interview, look at the show notes at the elpodcast.com. And again, for those of you that have not had the opportunity to check it out, there's a lot of additional content now in the show notes, from videos, over 2-minute takeaways, to the actual full transcript. Just a lot of good ways to take in the content, no matter where you're at or what you're doing. Thank you.
Looking for your next book idea? Head over to the elpodcast.com, where Wade shares his amazing resource, the top 10 business books recommended by over 500 entrepreneurs, with you for free. That's the elpodcast.com. Till the next time, keep it on the EL.